Supply chains didn't used to be boardroom conversations earlier. They were a function which was mainly used to cut costs and keep the lights on. But the world broke a few times. There was a war, there were a pandemic, and there were straits closed and canals closed. And that led to everybody talking about safety stocks and having an opinion on dual sourcing. But beneath all this noise, there's something changing fundamentally. Something is getting rebuilt. Supply chain technologies are not getting upgraded, they're getting rebuilt. Welcome to The Link, a Smartlinks podcast where we have conversations at the intersection of supply chain technology, industry, and the people deploying it. I'm Heera Ganjikota, Chief Strategy Officer at Smartlinks, where we are passionate about implementing technology to provide value to our customers and make supply chains more resilient. Today's guest, Amit, and I have more shared history than any pair of a podcast can manage in the first conversation. Amit Bagga has spent a huge number of years in supply chain enterprise software in organizations like Blue Yonder. Currently, he is heading Asia Pacific at Anaplan. Amit, welcome to the link. What I want to explore today is a question that the entire industry is dancing around: the impact of AI on enterprise software like supply chain. What is it really impacting? The output, the process, or the logic behind the decisions being made? These are three different things. So I'm looking forward to exploring this conversation with Amit. Amit sits in a very unique position of being both an operator and an advisor of organizations involved in this technology. We've been together in the supply chain world, you know, the period I'm talking about.
Yes.
So, what would you say you've learned that probably is not accessible to the generation that's coming into this world now?
Yeah. How far do you want to go? Well, I've been looking at the way we do business today and the way we learned how to do business in the software world, in the supply chain world. I think we were fortunate to be in the era of scarcity and the era of innovation.
Right.
People were really thinking supply chain through at that time. It was not a run rate business. It was cool to be in supply chain.
Yeah.
And there was scarcity in the sense that there was not enough talent. There's not like 100 vendors out there. So we, I think, benefited from that, where customers and us providers had no choice but to collaborate and innovate together. So we had the time to interact with each other deeply, contemplate outcomes, drive long POCs, understand the outcomes of those things, and that taught us exactly how things fall in place, how what's the causal effect of an action. And so it got us to help understand deeply, and that's where that depth of knowledge and understanding that comes through that, and customers were willing to work and engage with us. Today's world, there's two things happening. We've got to also look at the fact that the consumer is very different. When the consumer buying patterns have changed, that has a whiplash effect on supply chain. The volatility is much higher in the supply chain. So, and also there's a lot of people playing in this space. There's a lot of vendors playing in this space, and the customers are bombarded with a lot of areas. So they don't really have time to interact and engage that much, right? And now there's the AI piece coming in as well. So it's a very short time to value that has to be driven, and so you don't really get that kind of time. And so we were really fortunate, I feel, in that space to have been in that era to do that. Yeah, and it's really tough for the young folks now who have to come into the same thing and really run with it fast and iterate without understanding the implications of their actions as they go through this.
Well, as usual, you opened a lot of threads: innovation, tough customers, and AI, right? And we'll pick on each of these threads separately. First, I want to pick on the innovation thread you opened up. Organizations innovated when you were, and you went through a lot of transitions, right? From on-prem licensed software to cloud, from cloud to AI.
Yeah.
Now AI is everywhere, and now connected platforms. Right?
Yes.
What has these like transitions done to your sense of identity of being an expert in certain things? How have you handled that?
I feel much less an expert now than I thought I was at that time. And it's a few things. Your horizon widened, and we used to live in the world of demand planning, forecasting, replenishment, or fulfillment, or we used to live in those worlds: transportation planning, warehouse planning, and they were finite spaces to work with. As we have seen this way the supply chains work now, the, the each of these is melding into each other, and that's moving into that whole connectedness about it. And as I've started working with customers a bit deeper and understanding wider than the single problem at play, because in today's world, you change one thing here, it impacts another thing somewhere else, right? And you really are surprised every day as to what was the butterfly effect that happened in one end that led to a tsunami in the other side, right? And that's widened that experience to the aperture to really think now about what connectedness actually means. And companies at one point are looking sharply at EBITDA. So a decision that a supply chain planner makes actually impacts EBITDA. Right. And we don't think about that, right? But your decision on how you're going to fulfill an order can change the way the company's EBITDA for that quarter ends. So understanding the connectedness of these elements, I always tell customers, you're planning your warehouse and you've got these long-term plans for these warehouses that you want to develop, and you've got like 5 warehouses you want to roll out. This warehouse, if it's delayed by 6 months, you replan, which is normal. But nobody told the people who are hiring the contract labor staff. Those rates had to be negotiated over there. Those contract staff had to be done. Nobody told them. Now, how do you handle this 6 months of committed labor that you ordered for, right? So understanding each of the cause impact of each of these is really something that's, I feel, is now widening my aperture and making me understand that, wow, there is actually a lot more happening in a business than the world that we lived in when we started.
I also want to connect it back to what you're saying about customer behavior and resistance, right? And these transitions, one, of course, they shape who you are, but you also faced customer resistance when these transitions were going on, especially you are in Asia Pacific and the larger manufacturing customer base here, they resisted cloud, and probably there is resistance for AI now as well.
Correct.
How did you handle that earlier? That's informing how you're handling it now.
Look, my coaching to the teams has always been, you have to just put yourself in the customer's seat and understand the context in which they're making those decisions. Quite often we are going by a fad, like people go by the what's the latest fad, today's AI, but it was cloud, we must go cloud, we must go. But really the decisions have to be made based in the context of the way the customers are running their business or doing their business. And what happened was, it was not just moving things to cloud, but they ran very unstructured applications in those days in supply chain. These things grew from nothing. There was AS400 deployments, right? These things grew from nothing, and people built spaghetti bowls of architectures, and there was fear in it. We came with a much more standardized way of operations, and the fear was, well, my supply chain is different from your supply chain. How can you do that on cloud? And will my data go away? Those kind of things, right? So dealing with those from in a much more personal level with each of these customers helped us understand that you really need to first solve the emotional problem, and then you solve the technical problem in that.
I want to go a bit micro on that.
Okay.
You brought up AI. If a manufacturing potential customer tells you, "Hey, I've got an LLM. Why do I need Anaplan?" What do you tell them?
Yeah. You've used LLMs, okay, and you've asked them a question, and then you ask the same question again the second time, but the two answers the same. Never. And that is what I explain to customers, right? And I open up LLM and I say, okay, let's have that right now. And the reason is it's LLMs are basically designed to they process a lot of data. They have incredible capacity to be able to do that. But from that point, they infer an answer, right? And that could be different in different situations. You cannot, as a supply chain person, guess what your forecast should be. You need it to be an accurate number. And therefore, you really need to have a very deterministic outcome. So what we call LLMs is probabilistic outcomes. So LLMs drive probabilistic outcomes. And what you really need within your organization is data that you can depend on structured in a way that you can query properly and be able to calculate at enormous speeds to give you the very exact answer.
Right.
And you need that exact answer because we are in the business of definitives. So you need, but the best outcome is taking these probabilistic tools, layering them on top of a deterministic data set so that you're able to move very fast, right? Today, we get emotional about AI, we get emotional about these things. And I feel these are all development curves or maturity curves. And the end maturity curve where you want to be is making sure that you're making the decisions. It's all about measuring decisions. So are you making the right decision, the most accurate decision in the fastest time at high speed with maximum volume? So you're making many decisions and you're making them faster and you're making them more accurate. That drives much more speed within and agility within the business. That's where you need to take out guesswork and you need to have that deterministic.
So AI layer on top of deterministic computation engines. That's what Anaplan CEO also said. I want to stress test that a little
Yeah.
bit, right? Where do you think that gets stretched, this narrative? Because there is a narrative that AIs are eating software. So where does this pushback that you just talked about, AI as a layer on top of deterministic computation engines, where do you think it meets reality? Where do you think it gets stretched?
Look, I think this is where this is actually more real. Let me put it in context of where we've been hearing. Let's layer it back into supply chain, right? There's a huge cry from everybody talking about autonomous supply chains. In my view, autonomous supply chain is a long stretch. That's what we are talking about with AI, right? Who's doing that right now? That's where I feel there is a stretch. The layering probabilistic and deterministic together is actually a much more realistic outcome. And you can see that in the stock market right now. It went through that big dip, but it's coming back again. Realization is the same thing. So this is actually steeped in reality, right? To me, autonomous supply chain is nice, great to have. Everybody's talking about it, but that's a far cry. Nobody is going to be doing that right now and walking away from their supply chains. You really need human in the loop. You need human in the loop because there's trust deficit. That so what you want AI to do is to be able to help you with those decisions, but you have to have those decisions in your control, right? And that comes from being confident that there is a deterministic layer at the bottom that you can trust the data. So that's where I put it in context of not the context of deterministic probabilistic. I put it in the context of where the vision is, but what's actually the reality of it. So in my view, this is actually steeped in reality, and it's steeped in reality for some time to come for us.
What do you think is actually happening in between the narrative and this reality?
Hmm.
What's the cost of this gap? There seems to be a narrative that the enterprise software world is weaving around AI as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And then there is this reality of what actually is the
Hmm.
trust deficit you talk about, and layering the probabilistic with the
Yeah.
deterministic to actually make it real. But there is that gap. And what's the cost of that gap in your view, but both for the industry and the customer?
In my perspective, customers are leveraging AI around the edges right now. So that's where I've been really seeing a lot of growth, right? Let's pull that back. So we've seen customers with that whole COVID era and then the semiconductor shortage era, customers got a little bit of a shock in supply chains. And they really needed to come back and see what they can do to be better, more resilient. So there's been a lot of AI infusion in that ability for them to react. And we've seen that through Toyota and some of these companies in Asia. We've also seen companies like in India, you've seen like the steel companies and all with their whole in the manufacturing layer, in the operations layer, they've really embedded AI into it. The way I look at, and then we've seen a lot of companies using forecasting, AI based forecasting, machine learning forecasting, right? So where they're ingesting data from outside, where they're processing it at high speeds, etc. So these things have been happening, but there's it's a patchwork of things happening, and people are working depending on what's really critical in their business or where they see high risk. They're experimenting in these areas. I'm seeing customers using ALLM in a lot of edge use cases. So they're working through solving the problems that they were not able to solve before, or they never just got to it. Now they see a fast way of doing it in a natural language way, right? So they're moving towards that area. So to me, I don't see it as a bad cost. This is evolution,
Right.
right? This is evolution. This is how all technologies evolve. Technology always moves faster than adoption. You saw that with cloud. I mean, I could go back to 40 years ago when we were talking about cloud computing with virtual machines, etc. So it's the same thing with AI right now. It's actually layering in very nicely in different areas of the business, but it's not like proven in widespread adoption. And the reason is we keep coming up with hiccups. I don't know if you heard about the latest thing where Starbucks has rolled back their inventory management
Right.
system through, which was full AI because they were shipping wrongly labeled milk products to the market, right? So that trust deficit gets impacted. So it moves forward. It goes thing. The the biggest cost I see that is still coming is companies have to explain their EBITDA impacts based on the cost of tokens, which everybody's realizing right now,
Right.
and we have to really figure out how to rationalize that.
You mentioned Starbucks. Another example that comes to my mind recently is Ford.
Mm.
They brought back all the graybeard engineers because they realized that the tacit knowledge has gone out and AI has not been able to cope with that loss of tacit knowledge. Is this something you're seeing in Asia Pacific with your customers as well?
Of course, yes. And I think that is why both mostly enterprise customers are moving slowly because, and that's why that human in the loop is still going to remain. Now, big debate that all of us have is that's fine for now till this line disappears. The next line, if you keep replacing roles,
Mm.
then the next line gets impacted. How do you have this tacit knowledge retained, right? So obviously AI will learn through this knowledge, but I do think that in the foreseeable future, we will need to have this understanding, like I call it a triumvirate, right? Your like I talked about the deterministic
Yeah.
architecture below, so that you depend on the data that's real. Your AI is controlled within that environment to be able to engage that, and your tacit the knowledge, the industry knowledge that you need to continue to drive much more productivity within the business. So AI alone is not going to drive productivity in that space.
Are you able to have these nuanced conversations with your potential customers? I mean, is that percolating down? Because looks like AI is creating fear in the people
Hmm.
on the shop floor and
Hmm.
in the warehouse, right? What's your experience of customers dealing with actually taking these nuances and creating a narrative that's consumable by the organization and the system?
Yeah. So look, I would say not more than 30% of customers that we talk to even have an AI strategy.
Okay.
They have AI projects, but they don't have an AI strategy. Less than 10% customers actually trust AI to be autonomous in all the conversations that we've had.
Mm.
And this is validated by a lot of surveys and stuff that the big companies do. But that's anecdotally, that's where I've seen the reality. So they are very determined to have that human in the loop, which actually means it's not about replacement of jobs. It's about driving much more productivity. So the strategy that we are discussing with our customers is they have to feed their growth, and they are looking at exponential growth. Like I said, by much better decisions, faster decisions, and more decisions. Therefore, that they can actually drive faster growth, but with relatively less investment,
Mm.
right? So that's where AI comes in, because the companies that we talk to across, so Asia Pacific is such a high growth region, and it's such a high movement region, that customers are not talking about business as usual. They're talking about exponential growth all the time. So the exponential growth is where they're looking at how AI helps feed that. And so the strategies that they're implementing is more around how do you drive efficiencies in your operations, so that you can have do more with the same number of people,
All right.
right? It's not about I need to cut these many jobs. That motion, that's not the motion that any customer that I'm talking to is talking about. It's going the other way now if you go to places like Japan, where there is extreme labor shortage. So they're actively looking at AI to be able to substitute those roles to feed their growth because they actually have a crisis, labor crisis, right? So not no so I feel AI, and this is a broader topic that I have separate side discussions on, is AI, in my view, is actually going to drive a much better job satisfaction. And the reason for that is mundane roles are being taken away, mundane parts of the roles have been taken away. And you can focus much more on jobs that actually drive incremental outcomes, making better decisions, like I said. And that will actually drive a much higher job satisfaction because you feel you've achieved something out of it rather than filling 20 spaces in a spreadsheet all day long.
We were talking about this before we started this conversation, right? About the finance part of your connected planning. The finance world seems to have adopted AI much faster than the supply chain world. And you head both in this region.
Yes.
So what's happening? Why do you think there's a difference in the adoption?
I think in the finance world, it does not deal with the third dimension, which is inventory. It's human dimension. So it's basically data and human. In supply chain, it's data and human and inventory in infrastructure. So you have a lot more complexity to deal with in terms of the elements that you need to automate within the business. In finance, CFOs are very actively focused towards how do they drive more automation in tasks, and they're achieving it. How do you do better cost controls? How do you do better expense tracking? How do you drive much more reliable audits? How do you automate tax filing and driving analytics and all those kind of things and making decisions around growth? So finance is moving very fast from becoming a kind of a P&L management function towards a business advisor and a business strategy function, and having a much important say at the board table. Supply chain is really complex in that sense that we have a lot of widgets to work with, and therefore and supply chain can actually mean stockouts. That's not a good place to be, right? It can mean missed orders. So it's a little bit more slower in that uptake, in my view.
Are there places in the supply chain space, maybe even a mid-sized customer in APAC region, who's doing this well, the adoption of AI?
I wouldn't say any one customer is doing it well. We are seeing pockets of excellence. I'm not sure I can name customers right now, but we are seeing pockets of excellence in different spaces, right? People are there are what the one theme that I'm seeing is everybody is trying to see how they can connect agents, how they can connect different parts of the business through agents, right? I I wouldn't say that there's any one organization that's actually really led the way on AI, right? But the way I was talking to somebody yesterday from Schneider Electric, and the way that they have automated their workflows in supply chain so that they can actually have much better control of the inventory is incredible, right? We are seeing customers that are using the forecasting engines to now being able to drive significantly lower inventory positions for themselves, right? Significantly 30-40% lower inventory because of that. And then we are seeing customers that are trying to visualize how they consume the scarce resources like chips. So if you've got your backend supply chain depends on, say, Nvidia or any of those kind of chips that are high demand, how do you actually plan for that? So I've got one customer that we are working on a complex problem where they've got basically they're very dependent on three or four of these chip providers in the back end. It's a high tech company, but in the front end, they're actually OEMing into automobiles, right? So just imagine you're signing up a contract at a cost price with an OEM manufacturer for a model that's not yet come out, for a scarce commodity at the back end. That price fluctuates all the time, and you've got exchange rates and you've got tariffs and all these things fluctuating. That model may or may not sell at the capacity that we're thinking. You're tied in the middle,
Right.
right? So they're trying to understand how they leverage AI to be able to hedge their risks in that whole supply. It's a pretty complex problem to handle.
Yeah.
And so we are helping them with how do we use AI to be able to drive that whole connectedness from the source till the fulfillment, which is actually very unpredictable.
Right.
In that sense. A manufacturer can, an auto manufacturer can launch a model, but it may not do well. But you've got committed capacity that you have to deliver, and you've got back end that you signed that was 3 years ago, and those chips have gone a different way now.
I loved how you contrasted the finance world and the supply chain world. People data, and material, and that makes a
Yeah.
big difference. I want to pivot to talking about how AI, whenever it is mentioned, it's more about output, planning output, forecasting, etc. But what about the input? What about data itself? If somebody has to assess the risk, the data has to be reliable. Is AI exposing how bad the data is, or is it making the problem worse?
I think it's doing a good job at it, and I think that's why the need for these data lakes, data clouds that are coming in, and people are working hard at it, and organizations are working on it. In my view, there is a bit of an over pivot towards that, and the reason is I feel in a business, and I'm an operator myself. In a business, you have to take iterative decisions, right? So, what AI does is it exposes the need for better data, but it's better that it's exposed and you move forward than not knowing, right? So, I take it as a very positive position for us to be in, and for organizations to be in, where and it's exactly what we talk about with Anaplan. You should not wait for everything to be in a perfect situation before you load a planning engine, because you then plan to fail, right? Because some business does not stop till you fixed your data.
Yeah.
So you want to be iterative in this space, and you want to be able to surface what data. And sometimes what happens is, without a destination and without an end goal in mind, you can actually over engineer your data layer so much. So you need to focus on what data you need for your decision. That gets surfaced through these models, and you're able to understand, okay, this is not important for me, this is important for me, let's focus on this area first, and you prioritize in the right way.
That's an interesting take on data, Amit. And given that take, what do you think a system, an organization needs to really trust what is coming out? If they're moving ahead and let's go get this done despite the data getting exposed, let's take our decisions, move our business. What do they need to trust what is coming out?
I think it's so like what we are doing, we've got these anomaly detection agents at the bottom in the architecture, right? And that's a lot of vendors are doing exactly the same thing. So these are basically, you once you've understood what the architecture, what your data architecture, what your data ontology is, what your data architecture is, you understand what's the source data that you're coming from, and you have traceability of that data. That's the most important thing, right? So you can only trust once you understand, once you can trace it back to its source, and you want to do that instantly, right? And that also then shows what data is missing and what data is wrong, right? And the system starts learning through AI and starts figuring out these, predicting the anomalies in the data sets that you're taking the decisions on, and then you can go back and trace that down the history as well, which is where this whole deterministic piece there comes in, right? So in my view, that's actually the gold, the goal that you're looking at, and is basically being able to do that audit of the data, so that when you make the decisions, you've got the audit. And I think AI will get better and better at that. It's already doing that. It's already surfacing the audit trails. It's already and you don't need to go through and click like 100 buttons to do that anymore. You're able to do that instantly, and that's what you need for speed of decisions.
You head Asia Pacific,
Yeah.
a very complex region with very different type of customer base, like Japan, where data is rich and probably more truer, but probably the decision making is slower. Whereas in India, probably it's more decision making, but the data is not so rich and true. How do you deal with this variance and complexity of customers?
Yes, Asia, the land with more water than land. Look, it's actually a great challenge, and it's actually very interesting because Now these customers are maturing in Asia to actually learn from each other. And there's a lot of cross-pollination in that space as well, because as supply chains have moved across Asia, a lot of Japanese manufacturing is in India. It was in China a lot, Southeast Asia. It's all across Southeast Asia. Banks and all, like I'm seeing them move from like Australia. They're putting their development centers in different places. They're spreading branches. So there's a lot of cross pollination in that space. From a technology adoption and AI adoption across Asia, that there are three themes of AI adoption. First one is primarily around driving better forecast accuracy. That's really the obsession for AI. The second one is how do you drive a much more resilience and visibility in your supply chain so that you can react and never have to go through a COVID era again with your stop in the tracks motions. And the third one is being able to have early, easy access to data and integrate the whole LLM layer. And how do you create these small micro solutions that give you quick answers where you can go from not just querying a thing, but asking the why, drilling down on the why, and having those ability for you to map your entire data very, very quickly and get to decisions quickly. So that's the three areas. And the fourth one, which I talked about, is the whole labor arbitrage in Korea and Japan mainly, where that they're really focused on that piece as well. So that's your four pockets. Now, in different regions, each of these takes a very different shift.
I want to connect the data conversation with what you just brought in of Japan having manufacturing bases elsewhere, etc., right, in other countries. Recently, Anaplan set up a data center in Singapore. And I think that is speaking to data sovereignty that each of the countries are pushing for. Connected platform. How does this all sit together when the data is being boundaried geographically? How does connection happen? What's connectedness got to do with it, and how does it get affected?
So I will give a much more provocative position here. I feel technology is not the barrier for connected planning or connected outcomes. Organizational structures is the larger problem. So whilst we have ways, the data sovereignty is more around hosting the source data, but at in an intra-departmental supply chain space, there is no problem in being able to surface that through Anaplan across and have a single model on top for normalized data that you can make the core decisions on. That's not an issue, right? We are solving data sovereignty issues mainly which is very specific to those countries' needs, but they have no problem in getting that at a normalized level, in an organizational level, and be able to share that data within the organization. We deal with finance the same way as supply chain. So you can imagine within finance, it's even more complex. But at the end of the day, a Japanese bank needs to know what its Singapore branch is performing. You can't say, sorry, you're not going to get this data. They're not going to get the customer information and data. The same in supply chain. The larger problem with connected planning actually is the organizational structures and the interdepartmental politics.
Yeah.
So supply chain to finance to workforce or HR to sales, it's an organizational problem to solve rather than an architectural problem to solve or a data sovereignty problem to solve.
And how are you handling that? Or how do you advise your customers to handle it?
So we have a point of view that is called decision excellence, and we've been able to prove that there's an improved total shareholder value, total shareholder return, based on making the right connected decisions. So connected decisions, that means decisions that are horizontal across the organization, like a decision here shows an impact across the organization this way, or vertically within an organization, within even a business unit. If you can make faster decisions, more accurate decisions, you actually get a better shareholder return. So we use that to help organizations understand what's the end goal. And it's very iterative. We have never gone and say, okay, you buy Anaplan and you can now get a full connected architecture. You start with one and then you go to the other and then you go to, and I've seen that across the board. I've seen CFOs, once they've gained trust in the finance piece, actually force their supply chain organizations to use us, so that it's a common data layer. And the supply chain organization over time has understood that and have seen the value. A customer in India, that's exactly what happened. They were evaluating another supply chain vendor, and the CFO said, "No, I want it in the same model, and I want this flexible. I want this to be able to scale." And so they moved to this. Now we are moving towards the workforce for the same organization, right? So we have multiple customers that have gone the journey one way and then seen the benefits, seen the value, and then move iteratively across the organization.
Help me go a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah.
Yes, the chief supply chain officer, the chief financial officer both agree that shareholder value will increase. But what happens to the people on the ground, the person who's in the warehouse and the person who's sitting in the office doing finance? What about the politics between them? How do you handle that?
So actually, this actually a connected view will actually remove the politics. And the reason for that is the politics happen through lack of trust. Lack of trust happens through lack of visibility and lack of information and data. The idea that you can actually visualize when a change happens here, you can actually visualize the impact, and the other person's aware of this impact, actually helps them have a faster communication. Right now, this goes into email warfare
Right.
or questioning each other and all this kind of. But if you're actually working across the same data set and you're understanding the cause and effect of decisions, it's actually a much faster outcome, and it's a very logical outcome. So nothing really changes in anyone's roles, but they have better visibility of the impact. So they keep continuing to perform the exact roles that they need to perform. It's just how that information is done in instantly, so that you can make a resolution. Right.
I want to push on that a little
Yeah,
bit
sure.
more. How does this get institutionalized in an implementation cycle? What do you exactly do? Walk me through a typical delivery process where this really gets implemented and people on the ground understand what you just said.
Yeah. So one of the things we are incredibly careful about is making sure that the folks that are involved in the delivery, let's say you've gone through the cycle, the customers acquired this and they want to start delivering it. One thing that is extremely important is the folks that the teams that are there for the delivery understand the business processes and understand the impact of change with those business processes. If we just go in from a perspective of implementing the tool, it's guaranteed to be a failure, right? And so this is where and the way the tools are set up is we don't take months and months to deploy. You can actually have a first deployment in a couple of weeks, in few weeks. And mock-ups are models, and mock-ups can be done in a few weeks. So people can actually see it. When people see it, they understand the impact and they visualize it, and they visualize the business process. And then they can modify the business process, or they can modify the tool to suit the business process. And quite frankly, get the buy-in from everybody, right? Which is why Anaplan's been incredibly successful in Japan, because it works very well with the Gemba, with the workforce, right? Because they need to be super convinced before they move forward. For them to be able to visualize quite quickly, have somebody who understands business processes and they can debate with, and get to an agreement point, moves fast. And that's why I've seen so many large multinational customers just spread and plan across different business units for this reason, right? That's really the secret sauce for you to be able to see, touch, feel quickly, for you to interact with people who understand the business.
So there's the whole operational technology on the shop
Mm.
floor, right? The machines, the stuff
Yeah.
that gets done. And there is the information technology, which is the enterprise software that we're talking about. What's AI doing to both of these? Is it bringing them together? Is it like removing the boundaries? If you were to crystal ball into the future, what do you think will happen?
I think right now, no. And right now, look, you have conversation with any customers. AI is being actually implemented right now at the POCs level or small projects, and that they're very siloed. There's very few, like I said, there's like 10% maybe customers, and I think it's not just APAC, across the world, that actually have a full digital transformation agenda around AI that has an architecture that they want to end at. It's mostly at enterprise. So therefore, the factory floor is running a very different AI strategy versus the planning layer versus the technology layer. They're all running their own POCs. In fact, I was talking to one customer, a CFO, and he was really stressed and struggling to. He said, "Can you actually build me a model that can track what I'm spending where in all these pilots that are happening in the different parts of the business? Because everybody's got their own pilots running.
Yeah.
I have no clue what's happening where. My CIO doesn't have a clue what's happening where. We need to really pull all these together because I know I'm going to get hit by these bills, but I don't know what's the ROI for these." That's what I'm seeing symptomatic right now, without in the absence of that overall governance layer. Having said that, in the future, of course, we are still a little bit skeptical around that whole autonomous, everything works seamlessly together. We still believe there's a human in the loop piece
Right.
there. And for the foreseeable future, of course, the automation will get to a level where each of these will interact with each other much faster, and the agents will engage and interact with each other much faster. And what we want to make sure that happens is that they are not self-correcting each other. You can get into those massive loops of self-correction of the same thing. So that's a journey for us to go through. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to venture and say when, but the ability for these agents to interact with each other, to be able to at least surface the problems, is not too distant future. The ability for them to solve the problem and run, that's the trusted quotient that we need to,
Right.
as humans, accept. But the ability for them to surface by having this conversation and surface is not too distant future.
You talked about the fragmented AI strategy. Anaplan released the co-modeler, has
Yeah.
put it in the hands of partners as well as customers. Do you think these kind of things make it worse, the fragmented AI strategy, or help it?
I think so. Co-modeler is all about speed and high quality outputs in a short period of time, right? I feel we should these are just the productivity improvement elements, right? Productivity and accuracy improvements. So, and they're basically surfacing problems early so that you don't see them later. I don't see. I we Since then we've just recently released the agentic office of the CFO that has got 38 agents that work within a entire CFO organization, right? Now that's a very structured approach to taking a business unit and understanding the automation journey around the whole business, how AI should be layered across the whole business unit. So, so what it comes, it's predefined the strategy for you, and it needs to now fit into the chief transformation, the AI transformation officer's end-to-end strategy. So these, like the co-model and all, these are elements that come into that strategy and fit in to help drive better automation. For partners to be using co-model, we are encouraging that because that's actually going to drive a faster time to value for customers, right? So that's more about implementing the same deterministic architecture, which is super important anyway, but faster with less errors. That's the outcome.
I want to put a hat of the company that I'm
Mm.
representing in this podcast,
Yes.
Smartlinks. Right? When I look at co-modeler and when I look at these kind of organizations that do technology services, I'm like, how will we stay relevant? What will we do in the future when agents are actually doing the configuration? Models are built by AI agents, etc. What's your advice to somebody like
Yeah.
us?
Look, and I alluded to this earlier as well. So, firstly, I don't see in the foreseeable future AI is just going to replace jobs. AI is going to change the job descriptions, right? And companies that read the tea leaves early and do that are better. And to be honest, the way I look at it is that's what differentiates a good company anyway. So the fundamentals that you bring to the table are deep domain knowledge. That's why you cannot replace software companies right now with AI. Cannot replace these companies. Domain knowledge. it's the way work gets done is faster and more efficient and better, more error free, hopefully over time. But the domain knowledge doesn't disappear, and that's where I would see the differentiator comes in. So you should be able. So with Smartlinks, the focus on picking the right domains and having deep understanding. Like I said, when we were talking about where implementations need to go, what's successful, is the ability to have a dialogue with the customer to understand how the technology will transform their business. Right. Gone are the days you plug in a few engineers and you start getting them to code and finish the project and go away, and then the customer's wondering, what did I get?
Right.
Right, because time to value is faster, visibility of outcome is faster. So getting much more domain expertise, that's what's going to separate Smartlinks from the pack.
Say more about that. Let's say a few years from now, what do you foresee a partner really doing and contributing and adding value, both the customer and somebody like Anaplan?
I think with both. So we just put a couple of dimensions. So first dimension is a customer's one-to-one dimension, in the sense they are basically they have their business and they're very deep into their business and they have specific processes and they have a specific business that they run. It can be in any one micro sub vertical of an industry. That's their job every day. A software vendor like Anaplan is a one-to-many. You're trying to actually have a flavor, a flavor that works across many. The partner becomes the glue in the middle, which is the one to some. Right. So you're actually narrowing that to be able to take this, the one to many relationship, and narrow that down so you can provide extreme value to the customer. That's the secret sauce. Right. The technology will keep evolving and changing and become faster and faster, but how do you fit the technology to the business process and really the continue, like we said, customers are doing AI for AI's sake, are deploying things, there's a lot of AI, a lot of work that's happening, but it's not resulting to outcomes yet. Like the CFO said, what's my ROI? I don't measure it. But if you can become that agent that actually drives that outcome based on deep understanding of knowledge, you become the bridge from technology to knowledge. There's not many people that can do that. Okay. Right. And I feel that's where the back is. We always had that from a technology perspective. Now it's becoming even more important that that's the place to be. The domain's the place to be. Right.
You are in a very unique position of being both an operator and an advisor. Right? What do you think one role would say and commit to, which the other role would really not talk about publicly?
Yeah. So I mean, good and bad, right? So I within and as an advisor, I can dare to dream. As an operator, I'm constrained within the confines of the business I run. The flip side of that is, as an advisor, I have to be very careful what I what I what I say or what I advise or what I put forth as a thought or a hypothesis, because I'm not in control of the outcome, and my assumption of how that outcome should be delivered, I'm not touching that point. Whereas as an operator, if we work on if we execute a strategy, I measure what matters and I'm able to track that outcome, and I'm gonna make those short term decisions and adjustments to get to the right outcome. So it's in control. The strategy is in control. But as an advisor, I've got to really relate to the operator there and make sure that I have a strategy, a decision point that I can visualize that they can do, not me. It's a big difference, right? And that's and also how I don't stifle their innovative streak by thought. So there's a high responsibility as an advisor on what to say, what not to say, and when to say it, so that you don't stifle the innovation, but you also don't make assumptions on their ability to execute on something like that.
Make it more specific to the supply chain industry. I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Look, in the supply chain industry, like as an operator, I know I deeply understand the constraints within my business and where we should engage, where we should not engage. Right. I know which sub verticals I want to engage in. I know what's our innovation rate. I know what's our investment areas to focus on. And I know I know if I take that opportunity in that space, I'm going to be able to control it because I've got the right resource power to do it. I've got the right mindset to go for it, and I've got the right innovation to go after it. As an advisor, you are not privy to the internal machinations within the organization, right? And so within supply chain, for me to go in and basically look at say, look, this is a nice sub vertical, or this is the solution to focus on this thing, is fraught with danger without understanding. Like for me to go and say, you should really focus on trade promotion and retail when your intrinsic brain your intrinsic thought process is more towards planning and fulfillment or transportation or execution. And I'm saying, but this is hard. I know this is hard. Just go. And which is why the value of an advisor like me is as an operator rather than an MBA type. No offense to the MBA types, is you've learned the hard lessons of making mistakes that are impulsive, and so therefore you focus on what is within the constraints of the organization.
I love how we started with the lessons learned and what the new generation getting into supply chain technology is missing out on. And we are ending with the lessons learned as well. I want you to leave the podcast with giving an advice to the new generation that's entering into this space right now. What would be your advice to them?
Look, I would say two or three things. One is really embrace the new technology and be fearless about it and really experiment with it hard, because today this era is not about definitive. This area is about high experimentation and high innovation, right? So take risks and drive a lot of experiments and imbibe as much technology as you can. This time that you have right now of taking risk is never going to come back again. Your capacity to take risks diminishes drastically over time, and your capacity to innovate reduces drastically over time, because the institutional knowledge gets into your brain then, or your experiences get into your brain. Those are the two things. But the third thing I feel is, which is not happening anymore, is this whole quickly getting to a conclusion fast because you have enough information and data actually makes you stop thinking through expertise and process and domain. Like I said, in the future, domain experiences and depth of understanding of business process, depth of understanding of generally how things work, is going to be what differentiates you from the rest. And you can become a victim of technology and get out out of out of circulation because you don't actually bring anything to the table. So you you've got to think, why am I going to be the human in the loop? Why? Because we know there's going to be human in the loop, but why you would be that human in the loop? What do you bring to the table? That's really important for you to keep focus on, and therefore then connect the dots to what you should be preparing for right now to be that person that actually brings that value to the table that the organizations will always need, so that they know they make the right decisions.
Beautiful. Why would I be the human in the loop? I love that. Thank you, Amit. This has been a pleasure talking to you about stuff that I really am passionate about, I love, and I've spent so much time on. So this has been a great pleasure. Thank you for
Always a pleasure.
being here.
Thank you, Heera.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet
Take
you
care.
as well. There are conversations where you walk in with questions and leave with something you did not expect. This was one of them. In response to the question that I asked, how do you stay relevant in this ever changing world of artificial intelligence? Amit said, ask yourself, why would you be the human in the loop? And that stayed with me deeply. That is because I don't think that's being talked about loudly enough in the industry yet. Amit, thank you, genuinely. You sit in a very unique position in the ecosystem. You're running the Asia Pacific business for Anaplan, which is betting on how the enterprise planning world evolves. But you're close enough to the ground to know when the vision meets reality. This combination is exactly what this podcast is built for. For anyone wanting to connect with Amit, He's available on LinkedIn. And Anaplan is at anaplan.com. If you're building or deploying supply chain technology, or if you're responsible for the results of deploying supply chain technology, then this podcast is meant for you. I am Heera Ganjikota, Chief Strategy Officer at Smartlinks. We drop episodes regularly on this podcast, the link, both on YouTube and Spotify. You can look us up on smartlinkstech.com. Do follow us on YouTube and Spotify and wait for the next episode. We'll be back soon.